us today a very experienced Frank Ribu, who is the Senior Vice President in Asia Pacific Right Management. Right Management is a global leader in career management workforce solutions within ManpowerGroup. It has over 3,500 in over 300 global locations and delivers solutions to align talent strategy with business strategy. Right Management has the skills and resources to solve workforce management challenges and help grow talent, reduce cost, and accelerate performance. To know more about Right Management, you may visit their website www.right.com. Without any further delay, I would hand it over to Tuhina Panda, Project Leader and Change Manager at Right Management, to take on here. Over to you, Tuhina.
Thank you, Vikram. Good morning to everyone who has joined us today, and we hope that today we are touching upon a topic which is much talked about in the market, but also not talked about, because it's something which everyone does have on their minds, but is sure about what exactly does it talk about in terms of its meaning, and also in terms of how is it implemented in most of our organizations. As part of the two webinar series on career management, we really wanted to touch upon this particular topic on global severance practices, which is an important one, as all the world, whether it is and across any industry, there are organizations which are having to let go of some of their employees due to various business reasons. And as an outcome of that, there is a significant need to understand a little bit more about what is probably some of the best practices that are being followed around the world, and how are those best practices implementable in your individual organizations. So to talk about a little bit more, we will be covering benchmarks on employee termination specifically, and severance practices across regions and in industries. There is a lot of research insights that we would want to share from our work in the past, across over 30 years as Right Management, that we have partnered with our client organizations, help them implement an employee workforce outplacement process at their organizations. The most important thing, if we are sharing these research insights with you, how can you probably manage your workforce, delving more into talking about these research insights, and then also understanding that in terms of some best practices you could probably implement more specifically at your organization. So to talk more about this particular topic, we have with us Frank. I think Vikram's already introduced him, and he was our presenter for yesterday as well. But just to share a little bit more about Frank. Frank is the Asia Pacific Senior Vice President responsible for developing and implementing strategies to maintain, develop, and expand Right Management's business and relationships with the clients across the region. He also has direct general responsibilities for our ASEAN region, and plays a global lead role for our Center of Excellence practice. Frank has over 16 years in operations, general management, and human resource consulting. Prior to working with Right, Frank was also has played a variety of roles, going from sales and operations management to country and general management responsibilities for many Fortune 100 industry leaders. With this, I'd like to pass Frank to take over to today's presentation. We will have a 15-minute Q&A session towards the end of the session, where we will answer all of your questions and queries. So, with this, over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be with you again today. I hope everybody can hear me properly. I have the privilege of being part of the team of 5 people actually, who are just coming up with our global severance survey research data. that will actually be published only in about 3 weeks from now. So what you're going to see today is really a real sneak preview of what the results of that survey are. We don't have the official version and the executive summary out yet. That will be only available in about 2-3 weeks from now. So you're really kind of a privileged group today to see, what we've been able to discover through that refreshed global severance study. And it's also the first time that I'm actually presenting it per se. So hopefully I will not be rusty. I had a very big class event here in Singapore this morning, so I'm all ready to go. But the content is the first time that I'm actually presenting this severance today. Just about right management, and that was talked about earlier on. We've really come from about 32 years as a global leader in outplacement. So about half of our business globally, is around outplacement, about severance, about transitioning people out from organization. And we really have developed a very strong practice in outplacement, the same way we talked about yesterday with regards to our career management practice. And obviously we are part of ManpowerGroup, and as you can see on this particular slide, there are a lot of different interventions we do, around the region. And just to give you an idea, that's not on this slide. We look after approximately 20,000 people on the outplacement business, just in the Asia Pacific region on its own. A big number of that comes from Japan and from Australia, which are the two largest outplacement markets in the Asia Pacific region. Then come Singapore, then Hong Kong, then China, India a little bit smaller, and then it goes on, so Malaysia, etc., etc. So a fairly large experience with regards to that. The question really, we ask ourselves, other than the fact that severance is part of our own DNA, is, why should we focus on severance? Because when you see in HR, right, when we talk about career development, like we were talking about yesterday, that sounds very positive. Yet when you go and talk about when you talk about severance, that's not always that positive, because you will use that at times when it's difficult for the companies, so restructuring, or you have to let people go. So this is kind of a dark side of, of HR. But the reality is, you can actually use severance to your benefit, and really make it a positive thing, both for the individual who's being impacted, as well as for the rest of the people who actually stay. In our jargon, we call them survivors, people who stay within the organization and can see that employees who are being impacted are actually being treated well and fairly throughout the process. There are a lot of positive outcomes out of having a clear and very well established severance policy, and you can see some of the points here in terms of improving the effectiveness, avoiding litigation, because it really depends on where you are and what kind of context you operate in. But there are a lot of countries where people will go to court to actually try and get either more money or get reestablished within their organizations. So having a proper severance policy, having proper support, will actually help in delivering what your objectives are and mitigating the litigation risks. In addition, and I will talk about in the closing slides as well, you also help build a positive brand image. And remember, when we look at letting go of people, or when we depart from certain individuals in organizations, and by the way, we as right management, we have to do that sometimes as well. So we're not only preaching to people around what you should do, we also look at it from our own perspective. It is all about keeping that the people around positively engaged, because when you touch one individual, particularly when you start looking at the newer generations go into organizations very often with some of their friends, some people that they know, and when you let one of them go, all of their friends will actually side with the individuals rather than siding with the organization. So keeping the positive brand image, being able to reflect and say that you've done all the right things by the individual is really something that is important for many of our clients. So I'm going to spend some time looking at the highlights of the research, and as I said, this is really, really fresh off the press. So there may be a lot of questions you have. I've really picked only some of the key elements of that presentation, and when the global report will come out, you will have a lot more drill down, not only by industry but also by location. I will refer to some, Indian-specific numbers, but you will see that in the full report when it comes out. That shows you a little bit of the sample that we've been working with. You can see in India we had 75 respondents to this survey. Overall, Asia Pacific 528, a very well balanced sample across the world, Americas, Europe, and Asia Pac. And on purpose, we limited it to the largest markets, for us to really get a good picture of where we go. And what I will do today is I will talk about the severance policy. I'll talk about the severance calculation, so you know what are the trends and the habits that all these companies, those 1,800 people who have responded, what are the practices that they use in terms of calculating severance, how do they approach benefits, and then what kind of changes we're looking at for the future. One last point before going into the actual details of the research is that you should note, because that's really important, you should note that there are very significant changes and variations in terms of economic, in terms of cultural, and in terms of legislative background, depending on which country you're in. So, when you look at places like Singapore, when you look at places like India, and then you go and look at places like Australia, France, Germany, the legislative framework is very different, and that also drives quite a lot of the habits that we see, being used by organizations. And even within a particular region, when you compare Japan to India, for instance, even though we are all in Asia Pacific, it's like comparing chalk and cheese. Very, very different environment, very different legislations, and obviously a lot of different practices. As part of the event I was leading this morning with our clients, one of the questions and it was not related to outplacement, but one of the participants came to me and spoke to me about outplacement after the event, and one of the questions he had was, should we have a policy and a practice that we establish, as for everybody around the world, and it should be the same. So should we pay the people the same way? Should we let them go the same way? And my answer was really no, you shouldn't. And you will see as we go through these slides, that really the takeaway from this is, that you should not have a one size fits all kind of approach. So hopefully I'm speaking at this that allows everybody to follow. I know yesterday I was going a little bit too fast to make sure I was within time. So today I'll take a little bit of time to go through the numbers. So the first element that I wanted to look at was really, in terms of policy. What are the ways organizations are looking at establishing their policy, and what primarily governs the severance termination practices in each of the locations. So I will be able to quote you some India-specific data, but the most important thing that you need to take out of this is that there are two main things that really shape the practices of an organization. One is the legal environment in which the company operates, and the other one is the company culture and what the company wants to drive. What we're seeing is, when you will look at the global report, what you would see is that very often and across all regions, the severance policies are governed by a combination of both those policies and the local national laws. So when I look at places like Brazil, or when I look at places like Italy, which are outside of Asia Pac region, more in those locations, most of their policy is dictated by the national and local laws. When I look at places like India or Japan or Switzerland, most of it is actually driven by the company policies, and that's really something that we see very often. Is that in the Indian locations, even in the US, in places like that, we find that the company policy drives a lot more of behaviors, because sometimes the legislative network, the legislative environment, does not allow for the employees to really be looked after from a corporate social responsibility point of view. In developed markets in general, what we find is that it's more likely to be governed by the policy and by the company regulations than it is, in other parts of the world, other than markets where, as I said, legislative frameworks, are not as strong. So, India has a very strong, when I look at India specifically, 41% of the respondents said that it was governed by a combination of both policy and local law, when 36% said it was really driven by company policy, and only 23% said it was governed by national law. And that 23% is actually in a very lower quartile in terms of practices. What we did see though in the topic is that 3 out of the 4 companies that we interviewed, and remember there were 1,800 people who responded, 3 out of 4 people, had a formal written termination severance benefits policy in their companies, and that is true across the world, but it's even more true in places like the Asia Pacific region. We see in certain areas, like Japan, like China, we see percentages as high as 94%. So 94% of respondents said that they had an internal written policy, and we see some of those numbers being a lot lower when we go down in other regions around the world. The other thing that you want to take note of is that depending on the sector of activity that you're in, there are also some variances. The companies that are in the service industry, management companies, tend to have a higher percentage. Educational or institutions tend to have a higher percentage. Manufacturing tends to have a lower percentage, even though we're talking about the difference between 85, 86 on average to an average of about 79 or so. So remember, it's a combination of policy and local laws, but most importantly, 75% overall globally have a policy, much higher percentage when we go down to the APAC region. In terms of severance policy, there is a difference that exists between regions. We asked to, how the policies and how are you eligible to a severance package. For most companies that are in Europe and in Asia Pac, it is likely that the employer will require the employee to be at least a minimum of one year in the organization before they can be eligible for a particular severance. So very much so in Europe and APAC, 1 year minimum before you can be eligible to severance. When I look at the Americas, when I look at North America in particular, that number drops to 38%. So it's a much lower percentage. Here we're talking in APAC at about 57%. So 57% of companies will say minimum 1 year tenure before you can get eligible to anything. In the US, we're talking about 38%. Much lower. That's really because in the US, the flexibility around letting go of people is extremely high. So when there are retrenchments there, they tend to cover people even when they're fairly new within the organization, because it's the right thing to do in those markets. To the question around what the minimum amount of time that what you can see here is the period of time in terms of median weeks that will be that people will have to be eligible for those payments. So you look at a place like India, we're talking about median weeks of about nine weeks for people to be eligible to the benefits. When I now look at the business drivers that really talk about the severance, the main triggers for activating the provision for severance are very often the reduction in workforce or an organizational restructure. And as you can see in Asia Pacific in particular, we are talking about 61% of the cases where it's due to a restructure of organizations. We've been very much, until very recently, we were very much blessed by a very strong, economic situation and economic background, which allowed a lot of organizations to look forward rather than, cutting costs all the time. So when you look at the Americas, for example, reduction in force has been prevalent over the past few years because they've had to readjust their workforce to the level of business output that was required. In Asia Pac, the percentage drops fairly quickly to 59% because other than places like Japan and Australia, our two most mature markets, everywhere else we've been fairly blessed with good economic conditions. I remember going to India even 2-3 years ago, and we'd be talking about severance, and people would look at you with a big smile, and they would say, look, we're not too worried about severance. We're more worried about attracting people because we can't find them anywhere, in the market. And I can tell you, over the past 3 years in particular, that has changed. Even in India, we have today and last, really starting from a year and a half ago, we've seen a lot of restructuring on in India. But the biggest driver for that was really the reorg of the structure versus, reduction in force. And that's where really we see the differences in the different locations. In Europe and Asia Pacific, the employers are more likely to offer, benefits when the employee is discharged for cause. So when you go in places like the US or Canada or other places, if the employee is discharged because they've been dishonest or they violated the company rules, etc., the percentage of companies who will be willing to provide severance benefits will be a lot lower. You look at the US, for example, only 38% of organizations will be happy to support a discharge for cause. In Asia Pac, we've got the highest percentage. 50, up to 51% of organizations are still willing to support, even though the person may have not behaved the right way. So that's a point you may want to take into consideration when you draft your own policy, internally. And as I said, in the full report when it comes out, you will have even the breakdown by location. As far as the severance calculation is concerned, you will see here the mean number of weeks people will actually get, as part of the severance when you look at it from severance calculation. And those number of weeks, by the way, are number of weeks per year of service. So if you are a top executive and you are voluntarily taking a redundancy package or a severance package, in Asia Pac, as a top executive, you will get up to, on average, 3.64 weeks per year. And again, that's based on the sample that we have by a year of service. And as you can see, one of the trends we are seeing, and that's very consistent across the world, is the fact that the top executive and senior executive around the globe get more severance per year of service than any other level of employees. There is very little difference between, and the other big thing that you see is, there is very little difference between a voluntary departure and an involuntary departure. So someone you force out of the organizations. Very little difference. But where you see the difference is how severance is being used. So people will use severance voluntarily early on. So they will ask first for people to elect to go, and then they will move into a mode of, now we give a choice, and we basically tell people to go. But the payments out are, as you can see, are slightly lower for voluntary, but the difference is not that much. And if you were to, and that's just a little bit of trivia for you, if you are going to be let go, it's better for you to be let go in the mining sector, because the mining sector tends to pay, the highest week per year. It's about 4.3. And if you are going to decide on locations, well, you're better off being let go in China than being let go in India, because in China you would be let go with 4.1, 4.2 type of weeks per year of service, much lower in India, and definitely the lowest is Switzerland. India is about 3.6, and the lowest would be Switzerland at 2.7. And there may be questions that you have around cap. So do we put a cap on the amount of payment that we'll make to individuals? The majority of companies in APAC do that. 61% of organizations in the APAC region put a cap to the amount of payments that they will make out. So someone who's been with the company for 25 years, they may be eligible for 3.64 weeks per year, but there will be a cap to the amount of money that they will get paid. Now, in terms of benefits, when I look at what are most common benefits that are being given, regardless of the position or level, the top benefits that are offered tend to be in assistance programs. So they provide, most companies will provide outplacement and will provide financial planning, because when they make payments out, they want to make sure people use that money the right way, and that they plan in advance to maximize the dollars and give them more time to be able to look for, alternative employment. And then the next thing that is being looked at is continued benefits. So a lot of organizations are looking at healthcare and financial compensation for, an extended period of time. In Asia, one of the benefits, by the way, that does not come up in the research, but you need to be aware of, particularly for people who employ foreigners in one location, at least at manager and above, is very often a retainment of them on payroll, even though people are not working there anymore, to extend by a month or two their ability to stay in country. Because very often when you have an employment contract, you also get your work pass, and when the employment contract gets terminated, the employment pass gets terminated very quickly after that. So you see a lot of companies where they provide an extra month or two for foreign employees to actually look for jobs locally as well. So just be aware of that, and that's very specific, in APAC in particular. 2/3 of these in the world get the employees to sign a waiver or release before they can access the extended benefits. So, and that is 66% around the world. In Asia Pac, we're talking about 67%. So there is a great variation between countries, but on average in APAC it's about 67%. The highest location for signature of waiver is really China again at 88%. Sorry. And in India, it's only about 60. I'm just looking at the numbers now. India is only about 69%. So there's a difference in there. The interesting thing that you may want to note is that the outplacement service is actually not legally required in most locations. Yet 68% of companies provide that placement. In India, when you look at it, 65% of organizations in India, at least on the sample who responded to us, provide outplacement, even though it's not legally required. So when you start looking at it from a competitive point of view, and when you look at it from an attraction point of view, and when you look at it from a corporate social responsibility point of view, you may be looking at some of your competitors offering that kind of a service, and you may be not. And remember, when you look at it from an engagement perspective and looking after the survivors, inverted commas, that's something that you may want to take into account. But even in a place like India with a fairly buoyant employment market, a lot of companies that have grown internally, that are a lot of companies government linked, a lot of them, with family grown and still family owned. Despite all of that, 65% of organizations provide outplacement. And from experience, I can tell you that the major organizations, the ones that are prevalent internationally, and not only India-specific, definitely provide outplacement, because it's a good way to actually compete with the MNCs that they actually work with. The type of benefits that we provide will be very different, but the fact that they provide outplacement is a quite telling fact. And in the past 2 years, I've been involved with 2 or 3 very large outplacement global tenders that were coming out of India, which I had never seen, before that. So it tells you that it's really starting to pay, a lot of dividends. A question I don't have a slide around this is around retention bonuses, because a lot of companies I deal with ask us, or ask me in particular, do we need to pay retention bonuses? I just wanted to share with you that most organizations offer retention bonus, particularly to senior executives and mid-level managers, particularly when sustained performance is required. So if you need to have business continuity, and if you need to ensure that, when I look at specific examples of merger and acquisitions, or onshoring or offshoring, then or moving of a plant or of an office, from one location to another, and you need to have that continuity of performance, then retention bonuses are very, very often paid. And we're talking about 75% on average around the world, 75% globally. But in APAC, for senior executives, for top executives, it gets paid 80% of the time. And for senior executives, we're talking about 77% of the time. And then you go down in department heads, 72% of the time, and really, that starts to pay quite a bit of importance, particularly for business continuity at every level. When you go down to the general population in those organizations, what you'll find is that it's about 63%. So you compare top executives, senior executives, and department heads in the 70s and 70s, low 80s in APAC, and then general population about 61%. And by the way, this applies to voluntary or involuntary separated employees. So even people who get forced out of organizations, and you ask them to go, so they don't have a choice, they don't elect to it, the retention bonuses, still get paid those people as well. So it's an important, again, thing to note. Most companies don't offer cash in lieu for outplacement. So that is a question that all the times comes back. And in India, I feel that kind of questions together with Karthik, our practice leader, very, very often. What if I don't offer outplacement service and I pay the money to the individual, or the individual coming and say, I don't want the money, I don't want the service, give me the money. All I can tell you, for those of you on the call today, is people don't know what they don't know. So when they, and I'm not going to show you some data around, what was the state of people before they went to an outplacement service, irrespective of which provider you use, and what was their state after they went through the service. But the key difference is really their preparation to go to market. Most people think, when left on their own, most people think, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll go and find a job easily. And then 3 or 4 months later, when they haven't found a job easily, then they come back and say, oh, can you help me? And that's, unfortunately, at that time, you're really too late. And most organizations by that time are not willing to support outplacement service anymore. So, it is important, I think, to refrain from paying in lieu and really offer the service you can, because that is what's the difference. The money is great. You're already paying severance on the side, so pay the severance plus the service, and then you have a package that really makes sense. If looking ahead, and we start looking at the changes planned, really what we're looking at, what all of the organizations, when you can see here, is really about the fact that they are planning to increase the amount of benefits and pay that they provide to people when they let them go. And the reason for that is because and as you can see on this slide, India and China in particular are the two locations where the most all of our opponents, almost bar 1 or 2, have said that they were going to increase the benefits and the pay and the services they were going to provide for severance. There is a very, very basic question, a very basic reason behind that. China and India, until, as I said, maybe 18 months ago, never had to use outplacement, and really didn't have to very much look into their severance policy, because that was not too much of an issue they had to face. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that is something that they've had to, more and more companies have had to look at, whether they are local organizations or foreign companies. They've had to look at this in the past, 24 months. And really what they've come to the realization is, our benefits are not strong enough. We need to do something that really brings us higher in the corporate social, responsibility ladder, because we are really fairly cheap in the way we actually let people go, and we don't really take care of our people as well as we should. So you can see here India and China really be having a very high percentage as compared to the rest of the countries around the globe, other than Germany. So very, very interesting point of this survey. So what I'm going to show you here is really talking about how you can use this research. And as I said, you will have the ability to see the broader report and the more detailed report with all the locations and the breakdown when the report comes out in about, I would say, 3 weeks from now. But how can you use this survey, and what can you do? So I don't know the responsibilities that you have, and I don't know the scope of your company. Are you local only, or regional, or global? But let me tell you one thing. If you are global, is and I will read this statement because I think it's an important one. Despite an increasing homogeneous world, a broad sweeping severance and termination policy that governs every employee across the globe is not viable. And that was the advice I gave to the client who came to me this morning. You cannot take an approach that will be a one-size-fits-one. When you compare economically or politically similar countries. So, if I compare Singapore to the US, for example, which are very similar in their Employment Act, even then, I cannot use the same policy for both locations, because it's culturally not the right thing to do, and there are a number of practices that have been used in the market that needs to be prevalent when you actually go to get your severance survey. So the best organizations that we've come across really understand how severance needs to change in terms of different locations in order to create equitable practices that will go across the geographies, but also equitable within the geography that they're being applied to. So you want to have a global policy that makes sense, and that will give you a very generic framework on how you want to treat employees, and then you want to work on your policy in a way that is relevant for the local market. And the other point I just want to make for you is, there is a very strong showing that says that when you use outplacement in addition to severance, you will reduce the frequency of lawsuits. So again, in the report you will see that data, but generally you see a drop in lawsuits when you combine outplacement services and severance payments compared to just a severance service, and that's it. The other way to apply this research is really around how do you use the severance as part of a broader talent management approach. So severance is not only about paying people when they go, but it's it has a broader influence on the rest of your talent management initiative, and it has a huge impact on potentially your employment brand. The interesting thing when we were in China, and I've been in Asia now for 20 years almost, most of my working career, and I've seen a change in China and less so in India because India has always been a country where a lot of domestic organizations can survive with a big domestic market and with lesser competition from the rest of the world. But that will change, and I can tell you in China, for a very long time, many parts of the industry were very protected by the government, and when they became unprotected by the government and there were a lot more competition from the outside, very quickly Chinese companies have had to adapt their talent management practices to match or at least compete with what the global MNCs had to put in place. Because otherwise they would lose all the talents, at least those who could speak English, and they could lose all the best talent to the MNCs, because the MNCs had a better way of looking at high potential programs, development, mobility programs, etc., and also had better global severance policies when they had to restructure. So companies in places like China have really adapted to that very, very quickly, and over the past 12 months you've really seen a shift in the way people look at employment between MNCs and big local, or big local as we call them, global local companies. That same shift will happen in India. I can bet quite a few fingers on my hands that even though some of you may feel that you're protected at the moment because the India context is very different, the more India open to the rest of the world, the more the talent management practices will change, particularly around attraction of talent. Who are the people you want to get? Where do you get them from? And are you going to compete with companies who are better equipped than you to actually provide any kind of services? How do I retain high-value employees? It is quite amazing to see the amount of retention issues that happen with high-potential employees when you don't treat employees the right way. And again, I really encourage you to look at that for high employees. And then, how do I look at my transition talent? And because my separation has a very strong impact with the employees who remain behind. So this is how I would apply the research. This is how I would say, use it because it is very important and it can really make a very big difference for you. Before I open it for question and answers, I will just leave you with a number of departing thoughts. One is, severance is a complex issue to manage, and that's something that is irrespective of the locations where you operate. I'm currently dealing with a very large organization, largest organization in their environment, and for the first time ever, they have to go through an outplacement program, and for the first time ever, they have to do it in Asia Pacific. And I can tell you, working with them, it creates a lot of stress in the organizations because people are completely unprepared to actually deal with it. It creates a lot of stress in locations where they're going to it, and it doesn't matter that it's Singapore, Hong Kong, India, which are all locations impacted, by the way, Japan, Australia. varying levels of legislation, and yet a lot of thinking around, what do we do that is right for the employees at the local location. And they've made a decision for the first time to actually use Outplacement services in combination with the global severance package. It is very important for all of you to get it right, because it does have an impact, and I think we don't measure that enough, but it has an impact on the lives of people. We are talking about individuals. I mean, when you look at it from a global perspective or a regional perspective, or even at a country level, you say, yeah, I've got to let go of 100 people. It doesn't really matter who those people are, I just need to let go of 100. But when you actually go down to practicing it, you actually are touching individual life and their ability to actually support potentially themselves, their family, and the rest of the people around them. So there is a responsibility we all have to make sure that we do the right thing by the individual, whether we do it or not. Again, there's nothing on this, but I just want to highlight some of the ROI, because ROI is the big thing at the moment. We did another survey in 10 countries with 1,700 employees, 1,700 HR professionals, and let me tell you some of the ROI measurements that come out of that survey. And this is just hard facts that we've got out of this specific survey we did late last year. Productivity increased in the 12 months of organizations following downsizing for 34% of the companies that were providing outplacement. For the non-providers, only 20%. So when you provide outplacement, it's not a silver bullet, but it will give you more chances to actually increase productivity a lot more when you provide than when you don't provide. Profitability increased in 46% of the companies that had used outplacement versus only 41% of non-providers. The company stock increased by 31%, the cases where they were, and I'm talking about the 700 companies, okay? 31% had the company stock increase in price when they were providing, compared to just 10% for companies when they were non-providers. I can go on and on and on and on. Sick days. 28% had a decrease of sick days when they were providing outplacement, only 18% when they were not providing outplacement. I can point out another 5 or 6 points that were really very strong ROI measurement of why you should actually be looking at this. So I will finish on this particular slide. I'm going to open it on questions, and I know, Tuhina, you've already sent me a couple. And I just want to thank you for this and tell you that you can follow us on a number of things, on the web, on our site, on some of our blogs, and we've got Facebook pages, LinkedIn pages, Twitter pages. So when we actually publish the survey and the full survey, our team locally will be in touch with you, and you will also be able to receive those news through all of those media outlets. The first question that I received is the creation of severance policy CEO-driven or HR-driven? It needs to be HR-driven with the backup of the CEO. So, I said the same thing yesterday in career management, for the career management framework, but what I said in career management is my belief, and based on practice really, is should actually be for career development in particular, it should be really driven by the top leaders in the organization with the support of HR to actually make it a strong execution. In the case of global severance, I would strongly advise that it should be HR driven, but with the direct buy-in from the CEO. So a slightly different shift, and the reason why I say that is a lot of the practices and policies are really going to be driven by local government policies. So there are a lot of things that will come into play in drafting the right document. So HR will be a lot more involved in that than the global CEO. But the global CEO needs to believe in it to make it applicable. I can tell you, again, from years of experience in this region, it would be very easy for MNC not to apply outplacement because local managers would say, well, it's too expensive and, I don't want to give it, blah, 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 blah. But the global CEOs and the global head of regions, usually, and the APAC head of regions, do not even entertain those conversations. They will say, I don't care. We have a global social responsibility policy. We want to do the right thing by our employees, no matter where they are, and we will actually apply policy. The last comment I will make on that question is, remember that the world of work is changing. We are now in a world where social media and blogs and all these kind of things are becoming more and more prevalent. So it creates a new set of issues for everyone, because you could have a blog for your ex-employees that will not only compare of themselves how they've been treated within India, but they may be comparing themselves, to the rest of the world. That's an interesting issue that we can talk about separately, but that's something that really we have to look for as we go, in the next few meetings. The next question is about, can you explain a bit more on outplacement policy and what should be the key pointers for the India market? It would be too hard, in all honesty, to actually answer the question within, a 1 hour webinar that was meant to be a generic kind of discussion. What I will be happy to do, Arti, is actually set up an individual call with you where I can go through the specific India findings and what the policies for India should really look like, and what you should be taking into consideration in terms of the elements you need to include and the thinking behind what those elements should be. But that will be a one-on-one conversation, because I can tell you each policy as well needs to be very relevant to one organization and not across. So sorry I cannot be too direct, and I'm giving you kind of a blurry answer to this, but making generic comments on this call will be not very helpful for you. The other question we have is, legally, can we outplace few employees and outsource their activities? The answer to that is yes. The discussions that you can have when you outsource is really an outsourcing conversation. So you've made a decision as a corporate. The legal issues that you tend to face in most occasions is not around the fact that you would outplace people, but it's around, are you replacing their job with the same job? So where you get caught in most of the locations, including India, is, I'm letting go someone, I'm giving them a redundancy package, and then within 3 weeks, I'm actually replacing their job with exactly the same job description, and I'm taking somebody else. That would give you cause for legal problems. If you make a decision of outsourcing, that is a different scenario altogether. You're taking a number of tasks and functions that you're basically move them out of your organization, and you're not repeating these jobs internally. This is a completely legal thing you can do, but again, you have to be very careful on not replacing those jobs within a period of time, and then you basically look at how you can transition potentially those people to the outsourced vendor, and then also potentially give them a choice of them joining that vendor or them taking a global severance package. I hope that answered that question. The next question is, how will the severance calculation differ for expat employees employed in India? Is it recommended to follow the guidelines that one follows in India, or may we draft a global policy, or based on the home country for the expat? So there are multiple answers to that question, but my general advice is to base the expats on where their employment contract is attached to. So you have to take a mixture of two. So you have expats who are based in India, get expat benefits or local benefits plus, because you've got a lot of localized contract potentially. And what you may do is, if the contract is local and the benefits are plus, you may want to give them the benefits that you would provide in the legal India environment, but add a few plus to that as well. One of the direct examples, for example, is in Outplacement, we face that all the time. If the person starts their Outplacement program in India, but yet has to move back to, let's say, France, because I'm French, so let's say you move back to France because you can't find a job in India, then you should cater for them to be able to follow their Outplacement service in France as well, because that will give them that continuity that takes place. Now, for pure expats who have a contract signed of another location, and they are tax equalized, and they are attached to the mothership in many ways, then I would really advise for you to follow the practices from the mothership or from the location where they come from, because ultimately that's where they will go. They may try to stay in India, but ultimately, when they go back, they will go back to that location, and they will compare themselves to people who are from location as well. So I hope that helps, with that particular question. I think that's all the questions I've had, and I'm just finishing with 1 minute, 1 minute over time. I really thank you for the questions. I'm more than happy to be reached directly via emails. Tuhina will provide you my details, but I really thank you for attending the call today, and I hope that was useful. And remember, the full report will come out in about 3-4 weeks from now. Thank you very much. Tuhina, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Frank. I think today's session was really very insightful and extremely helpful in terms of understanding the landscape for the Indian market when we talk about workforce outplacement and career transition. This is a session that we wanted to do for a very long time, and it's really great that we've been able to do this because, number one, having you, Frank, as one of the experts on career management and sharing obviously best practices from around the world, but specifically, for all our participants today, we wanted to share pointers that help us understand what's happening in the India market these days and where do we kind of go from here. And the past couple of years, you've been seeing, especially just from a right management perspective in India, an increase in terms of the companies which are reaching out to us who talk about workforce outplacement and career transition, and everyone's been also involved in talking more about what is the impact on the severance practices because of that. And since people employees also are becoming much more aware of that the fact that they could be kind of asked to leave, but what is the impact on them, what is the impact on the remaining employees, and what is the impact on the market going forward, and also obviously important, the employer brand, that image that is created because of this, and hence we really wanted to talk about it. So thank you, Frank, and thank you to all the participants. I know that many of you have a lot more questions, and we've unfortunately we had a we had a designated 1 hour time slot to cover and this topic, but I'd request that you could just write into us, and specifically individually out to us with the queries that you have, and we'll be very happy to answer those queries, and probably have a meeting or a telecon to talk more in detail. So with this, we do come to the end of our career management webinar series over 17th and 18th October, and we hope that we get a chance to do more of these sessions in the future, especially probably after our our research study comes out, and maybe then we can have a different discussion on this. But with this, I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today and yesterday as well, and we hope that you look forward to any of our future webinars along with the People Matters. Thank you, Vikram, for hosting this series for us, and I request you to please close this session today.
Thank you, Meena. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar. Thank you, Frank, for the very interesting. I'm absolutely sure that all of us will be looking forward to the results of the global study when they are out formally. I'm also certain that all the participants like me will incorporate the insights that you shared as part of our everyday thinking process. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we bring this to a close. Thank you all for your time, and I hope to see you soon in our subsequent webinars. Thank you, Frank, and thank you to Meena.